Okay, good morning, everyone. It's good to see all of your faces today. What I want to do this morning is I want basically to pose to you a question for you to self-examine. I'm going to give you a question that I want you to contemplate about, and that's basically what I want to do this morning. We're going to look at a few different passages that give us examples of different answers to this question, although there aren't that many answers to choose from. And that's it. That's really all I want to do. Now, if you've been coming on Sunday evenings, you know we've been doing a series going through the Bible and looking at the temple theme through the Bible. And the key to that theme, as we've discussed, is the presence of God. The temple is about the presence of God, and for us today, the temple is found as the church. And so we, as the church, as the temple of God, as the house of God, are God's place of residence. We are the location where God finds his special presence. Now, of course, we know from passages like Jeremiah chapter 23 and 24, that God is present everywhere, that there is no place where he is not. Am I a God who is near, declares Yahweh, and not a God far off? Can a man hide himself in hiding places so I do not see him, declares Yahweh? Do I not fill the heavens and the earth, declares Yahweh? So God tells the people that he is, in fact, the kind of God who is expansive. He is the kind of God who is so big that he cannot be contained within the heavens and the earth because they are things which he has created. Okay, that is true. And yet throughout all of Scripture, we see that God has a special manifest presence in various times and locations. Especially, we think of it as visible in the tabernacle, when the cloud descends and hangs over the most holy place in the tabernacle. So there is this kind of special presence. And the question I want to pose to you this morning is simply this. How do you react? Or how does it make you feel to be in the presence of God? How does that make you feel? How are you going to respond to that? Now there are basically two possible responses. You like it. You see it as a good thing. You see it as a blessing. The presence of God is something that you actively pursue more deeply. Or, on the other hand, it is something you don't like. And it's something, in fact, when you think of the presence of God, when you remember it, that you actually push away from it and you seek to leave God's presence. Because for you it is not a blessing, but a curse. Now, one of these is obviously a better response than the other. So it seems pretty, it seems like, we should be done here. You know that this should be your response, and that shouldn't. So that's it, right? But unfortunately, I think it's always important for us to remember that however much we always want to find ourselves in this camp, it's more helpful for us to recognize when we're really over here. That's the only way we're ever going to make progress. So I want to look at a few passages where we see people react to the presence of God and different ways in which they do. And of course, the first example that should pop into your mind takes place in the first temple. In Genesis chapter 3, after Adam and Eve sinned. Genesis chapter 3, starting in verse 6, you notice here's where things change. If you read chapter 225, we read that the man and his wife were together in the garden. They were both naked. They were not ashamed. Something changes the fate of the entire world in verse 6 of chapter 3. The woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, that the tree was desirable to make one wise. So she took from its fruit and ate. She gave to her husband with her, and he ate. And from this point, notice that they feel much differently than they've ever felt before. Verse 7 says that the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. They'd never cared before. They'd never noticed before. But now suddenly they care. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loin coverings. And then they heard the sound of Yahweh God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of Yahweh God in the midst of the trees of the garden. Yahweh God called to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" And he said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and so I hid." Adam has the closest relationship with God of anyone we read about in Scripture. That they inhabit the same physical location, that they walk together. Well, I say together, I don't mean like next to each other necessarily, but they together walk among the trees of the garden. And we look back on that and we think, what an incredible blessing. That's exactly what we're looking forward to. That's what we're hoping for. That concept is the basis of our hope. And Adam has that right there. And you notice in this moment, he shuns it. He's no longer interested in that. And the presence of God is no longer a blessing to him. He does not run to God, and no, instead he hides from God because God's presence frightens him. It frightens him and his wife, and they don't know what to do, and so they hide. And the reason why they hide is pretty obvious. It's because they've sinned. Now, before that moment, everything was just fine. After that moment, everything is not fine. And, sometimes we like to pretend that God isn't present. See, we already know that there are two senses in which we speak of the presence of God. There's the omnipresence of God. There's God's presence everywhere because he is everywhere. And then there is also this special kind of presence. And Adam is hiding, and yet he cannot hide. He's hiding so that God can't see him, but it doesn't matter because God actually still can see him. We try to hide from God when we sin because we don't want God to see us, because we're ashamed, and yet God still can see us. And so what happens in that moment is we're lying to ourselves. We're trying to fool ourselves. It's a little bit like when a small child is trying to hide, and they try to hide behind a pillar or something that obviously cannot conceal them at all. But it covers their eyes. It covers their eyes, and so you can't see them. But It's such a feeble attempt at hiding. When we sin, we don't want for God to see us in our shame. We don't want God to see us in our spiritual nakedness. And so we try to do what we can to cover up. We try to do what we can to hide, to forget about it. If we can forget about it, then in a weird way, we hope maybe God will forget about it. If we don't think about it, maybe God won't think about it. But we're just playing a silly game. And when we come to remember the presence of God, we are forced to face our real condition. As long as I can imagine, as long as I don't imagine that God is close to me and that He can see me, then I am free to obstinately choose this forbidden fruit. But as soon as I remember the all-seeing eyes of our ever-present Father, I am filled with the same guilt that Adam is filled with. And this creates a difficult tension. Because in fact, we know this, God is the only one who can fix this problem. God is the only one who can clothe Adam and Eve and remove their nakedness. He is the only one who can restore them and who can bring them back into fellowship with Him. And yet, they don't want to be with Him. And we don't want to be with God when we sin. There is this example. Another location, which when we went through our series, we didn't spend much time on this. I alluded to it. But in Exodus chapter 20, at Mount Sinai, at Mount Sinai, God gives the law to the people. And He has a special presence here as well. This is before the tabernacle is built. It's before the designs are given. God is going to get into those details through the final chapters of the book of Exodus. But in the meantime, God has a special presence with His people here at Mount Sinai. And He gathers them here, and the presence of God appears in really a very terrifying kind of way, described at the end of Exodus 19. In verse 18, Exodus 19:18, Mount Sinai was all in smoke because Yahweh descended upon it in fire, and its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. And the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Then Moses spoke, and God answered him with thunder. This is a terrifying presence. And unsurprisingly, when we look at Exodus 20, verses 18 through 21, and we see the people's reaction, it isn't that they want to get closer to the mountain. It's what we would expect. Exodus 20, 18 through 21. The people perceived the thunder and lightning flashes, and the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And the people perceived it, and they shook and stood at a distance. They back up. They don't want to be anywhere near this mountain. And they said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but let not God speak to us, lest we die." And Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, in order that the fear of Him may be with you, so that you may not sin." So the people stood at a distance, but Moses came near the dense gloom where God was. And here we see a completely different reaction between Moses and the people. The people back up as far away as they can get. They don't want the presence of God here. They don't want to hear the voice of God. This is not just, sometimes we say that the fear of God is from awe, reverence, and respect. They're feeling something that is true fear. They're fearful for their lives. They don't know what God is going to do to them. Moses, on the other hand, draws closer to God. He walks right into this. It doesn't scare Moses. Now, why do you think the people feel this way? And Moses doesn't. Well, there are lots of reasons we might postulate. Moses has spent a lot more time talking to God. Throughout the book, up to this point, he's been in constant communication with God. He prays to God, God answers him. He's been God's spokesman this whole time. He has observed God's constancy. He has observed that God has done really amazing things for the people. But the people have observed many of these same things. They've observed the same plagues. They went through the same Red Sea together. They've gone through all of those same experiences. But they don't trust God. They're still fearful. They still think God is out to hurt them. Why? Well, this is Exodus chapter 20. This is when God gives the tables of stone to Moses. I want you to think. Moses goes up into the mountain. He receives these tablets of stone. And he's drawing closer to God and absorbing the word of the Lord as it is being revealed to him. And what is happening at the base of the mountain where all the people are? What are they doing? They're building an idol and worshiping this idol and giving honor to this idol for all of the things that God had done. As long as they withdraw from the presence of God, they are free to commit sin. When Adam, have you ever thought about this? Adam and Eve, when they eat the fruit, they're standing here next to Satan, giving ear to the things which Satan has to say to them, and they are not listening to God in that moment. Distance from the presence of God enables us to sin. It allows us to, because we're little children, and we think that if we can't see God, He can't see us. And if we can't see God, He can't see us. And if He's not observing the things we do, then we're free to do whatever we want. And sin sneaks into our lives because we open the little door and let it walk right in and hope that God won't notice and He won't see. And so, just like when your parents weren't home when you were children, and they come home, now you realize you're going to have to face consequences. Because they were away, you could do whatever you wanted. But now that you're thinking, you're forced to think about them coming back when you hear the car in the driveway, and you know they're back now, and now you're stuck. You can't undo what you've already done. The people are standing here, and they don't want the presence of God, because as long as God is there, they feel too convicted to sin. And after they've sinned, they don't want the presence of God, because now He's going to address their sin. But Moses has fully bought in. And he doesn't care. He's not afraid of God, because as long as he's with God, he doesn't have anything to worry about. If he remains with God, he's not going to sin. If he doesn't sin, then he doesn't need to be afraid of the presence of God. You see how this feeds back into itself? Another example that I think it's different from these is in Isaiah 6. Isaiah 6 takes place in Solomon's temple. Notice how all of these are occurring at these temple locations. I think that's interesting. Isaiah chapter 6, in verses 1 through 5. This is the calling of Isaiah. It doesn't happen at the very beginning of Isaiah, but he looks back and he's talking about this sets up for the rest of the book. This is an important scene. And I used to read it a little bit differently than I do now. In Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 5, 1 through 7, he says, "In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and with the train of his robe filling the temple." So he has this vision, and it's a vision of God's manifest presence over the temple. "And the seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called out to another," these are the words we sang this morning, "Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." Not just the temple. "And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called out, while the house of God was filling with smoke." And look at Isaiah's reaction. He says, "Woe is me, for I am ruined. I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, Yahweh of hosts." Pause. In the past when I read this, I thought, oh, Isaiah's just feeling this way. It isn't true. But I think it is true. Isaiah looks at himself and he says, I'm a sinful man, and good things don't happen to sinful men when they approach God who is holy. That's a very dangerous place to be. And he knows that, and he admits that. Woe is me, I am undone. I am a man of unclean lips. The reason I believe that Isaiah isn't using exaggeration or hyperbole is because that's how God reacts. One of the seraphim, verse 6, one of the seraphim flew down, flew to me with a burning coal in his hand, which he'd taken from the altar with tongs. And he touched my mouth with it and said, "Behold, this has touched your lips and your iniquity." So he was a sinful man. "And your iniquity is taken away and your sin is atoned for." What makes Isaiah different from the examples we've looked at so far is that Isaiah is fearful, but he doesn't run away. He doesn't try to hide from God. And because he stays there, God atones for his sin. God is the only one who can do that. By running away, Isaiah would forfeit that possibility. By running away, Adam and Eve, when they hide themselves from God, what is God going to be able to do for you if you're not near him? How is he going to help you? But instead, Isaiah stays here, and the seraph comes down, and it's all metaphoric, right? But God addresses his sin, but forgives his sin, and says, now you have a job. That's the rest of it. We're not going to read the rest, but God gives him a mission and says, I'm going to send you on a mission, and you're going to preach to these people, and you're never going to stop because they're never going to listen to you. But Isaiah turns things around. He was a sinful man. His sin is addressed, and he continues, not as a sinful man, but as a servant of God. And this is so much more beautiful than what we see with Adam and Eve. With Adam and Eve, I will point out that God does come to them, and eventually they work through things. They talk through these matters. God punishes them, and they go on with their lives. And I don't know if they were righteous from that point on or not. I personally would assume so. but that's another thing. Now I want to look at yet another example. In Luke chapter 5, this is the calling of the fishermen, the Galilean fishermen who became apostles. Luke chapter 5. Jesus is beginning his ministry. Jesus didn't start his ministry with apostles. He started his ministry by himself. And over some period of time, I don't know how long it was, over some period of time, he gathers some disciples to himself and appoints them, some of those disciples, to this rank of apostle. Okay? In this context, we have these men becoming disciples. While the crowd was pressing around him and listening to the word of God, he was standing at the edge of the lake of Gennesaret. That's the Sea of Galilee, just another name for it. And he saw two boats lying at the edge of the lake, and the fishermen, having got out of them, were washing their nets. And Jesus got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put out a little way from the land. He sat down and began teaching the crowds from the boat. When he'd finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered and said, "Master, we labored all night and caught nothing, but at your word, I'll let down the nets." And when they had done this, they enclosed a great quantity of fish, and their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat, which we know is James and John, for them to come up and help them. And they came and filled up both of the boats, so they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw this, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." The presence of God, and I don't know that Simon recognizes this fully at this point in time. We do. We look back and we see that Jesus is the incarnate God, standing here in this boat within his own creation as another one of these temples. And he is standing here, and his presence is frightening to Simon because Simon recognizes that he is not a good man. Now we might want to say, well, but I'm sure he was. No, there's no reason to believe that before this moment he's this upstanding man who is very righteous and holy. There's no reason to believe that. But after this point is where things change. It is after this point we're coming in contact with God. Although in his condition he is fearful of Jesus, he actually begins to follow Jesus because Jesus says, "Come along with me." Verse 10, "Don't fear, because from now on you will be catching men. I have a job for you, and I'm going to put you to work." So God takes Isaiah, God takes Simon, God takes Moses. Moses was not a wonderful dude before God calls him either. God takes these men and women throughout the ages who were not righteous, they were not holy, they were not good, but he invites them into his presence. And when they accept that, and they cling to that, God takes them and transforms them and puts them to use, and he makes them holy, and he makes them righteous. And God will do the same thing for us if we are willing to have that same willingness. That instead of being fearful, that we will draw near to God. In James 4, verse 8, James 4, verses 7 and 8, James presents this as a choice. In verse 7, "Be subject, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. If you walk away from the devil, you leave his presence, he'll go away." And in the same way, verse 8, "If you draw near to God, God will draw near to you. And therefore, the solution is for us to cleanse our hands and to purify our hearts. Because we are going to be repulsed by the presence of God until we cleanse ourselves, until we submit to God's holiness. We're also going to struggle to do those things until we come in the presence of God. There's a difficulty here because each begets the other. If we want to draw near to God, we must be in His presence. If we want to be in His presence, we must draw near to Him. That's the difficulty, isn't it? And that's what we see, is that for Isaiah and for Peter, and we don't have time to get into it, but for the prodigal son, that when they came back, they were fearful. And yet they withstood the fear so long that they overcame it. As we read in, well, I thought I had written it down. Oh, I did. There it is. In 1 John chapter 4, I do believe this is related. 1 John chapter 4, verses 17 and 18. By this love has been perfected with us, so that we may have confidence in the day of judgment, because as He is, so also are we in this world. We can have confidence if we are holy and if we are filled with love in the same way that God is. Verse 18, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment, and the one who fears is not perfected in love. We are fearful in the presence of God because we have not fully developed that fear into love. Because when we love God, we will be like Moses, who in Exodus chapter 33, not just has he withstood the presence of God to this point, not just as he stood on top of this mountain with the thunder and the lightning and the earthquakes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, but he says to God, give me more. Show me your glory. It isn't enough. I want to be even closer to you. I want to know you even more. Because Moses loves God. He isn't afraid of God. At one time he had fear. At one time he stood in front of God. When God called him, and he made excuses. And there was this reason, there was that reason. He was afraid of the people, and he was afraid that this would happen. He was afraid they wouldn't believe him. And he was afraid of Pharaoh. And he prayed with worry and anxiety, but this fear develops, and it is no longer fear at this stage. It has become love. Peter stands before Jesus and says, get away from me, because I am a sinful man. But after much time with Jesus, he no longer is afraid of Jesus. He loves him. And he gets to a point, even through many ups and downs, he gets to a point where he defends Jesus and he proclaims Jesus at the cost of his own life. How do you feel about the presence of God? I don't expect that you feel exactly the same way all of the time, because there is none of us who is perfect. And every time we sin, we are in some sense, in some quality, we are repulsed by the presence of God. Because we know that God has both, as Paul says, a good and a severe aspect to him. That based on our actions and our lives and how we have responded to his call, he will show to us, and final day, either goodness to those who have embraced him, to those who have gone on to know him, or severity to those who are so repulsed that they don't want to know God, they don't want to do what he says, they don't love him, they don't obey his commandments. We know this. And it's hard because we vacillate. We aren't consistent all the time. But I want you to contemplate on this and to remember that God is ever present with us in two ways. Because it is not only true that God is present everywhere, because he is omnipresent, but because we are Christians. Because we are the church, we are this temple together. God is present with us in a special way. In a way that we celebrate in this assembly. In a way that hopefully we embrace with our lives and put into practice. If you have any need, please come as we stand.